Greetings, viewers. Eric the Car Guy here, back again with another live show where I answer your automotive questions here on Google+. That being said, there are a few things I must go over before we get started. The first is, if you're watching this video on YouTube, I cannot see your comments there on YouTube, so I will not be answering questions posted to the YouTube video. Apologies for that in advance. I will be taking the questions from the Google+ event, so if you're looking to find out where to post your questions, there should be links on my social media that should lead you to that. You can post your questions there, even during the show. And I'll be answering as many questions as I can during the show. But once the show is concluded, I won't be answering questions until the next show, which would be in 2 weeks. According to the calendar, it looks like that will be May 27th. It'll be at the same time. Outside of that, I sometimes butcher your names. I apologize for that in advance. I try very hard not to, but hey. And of course, my neighbor once again has decided to cut his grass while I'm doing a live show. So if you hear that noise in the background, apologies for that. Outside of that, oh yes, if I don't get to your question today or you fall under any of those categories that I spoke about previously, you can always visit EricTheCarGuy.com. There's a welcome video there to tell you about the things we have at EricTheCarGuy.com to help you with your automotive issues, including an automotive forum where you can post your questions at any time. But that's available to you 365, 24/7, all that kind of stuff. So that's always there to help you with issues. I will also, anything I discuss in this video or questions, things that get answered, I'll put links down in the description. So please check the description for additional information on the stuff that I go over today. So now that we've gotten through all that, why don't we just dive right in and get started with our first question, which Jinzo Defiler, interesting. Oh, a little My Little Pony icon, funny. All right, hey Eric, is that Twilight Sparkle? Yeah, I know that. I have a daughter. All right, hey Eric, 2005 Chrysler Town and Country, 3.8 V6, 93.6 thousand miles. Wow, that's specific. The van also has four-wheel disc too. I've been having issues with brake pulsation and it's squeaking really loudly when I apply the brakes. I have a suspicion that I might need to replace the friction material, but also thinking there might be a warped rotor because this winter I had put the spare on and might have warped the rotor from that as well. Yes, well, putting your spare on is not necessarily going to warp your rotors. Over torquing the lug nuts could possibly cause them to warp. That could just be temporary, however. You can sometimes remove the lug nuts and torque them to the proper torque, and you're good to go. I've done a video about this. But it does sound like your brakes need to get some eyeballs on them. So pull the wheels, take a look at the brakes, take a look at the friction material. One of the #1 complaints I get about brakes is brake noise. And of course, brakes that are worn out will be noisy, but also it depends on the type of friction material that the pads are in your case, brake pads are made from. Some friction material is noisier than others, let's just say. In my experience, ceramics are the quietest. They seem to work pretty well. Organics are really quiet, but they wear out quick and create a lot of brake dust. In fact, I'm not even sure I've seen organic around in a really long time. Mostly what I see are ceramics, and they usually end up being pretty quiet. As far as the brake pulsation goes, I've also done videos on this to determine if the pulsation is actually occurring in the front or the rear of the vehicle. On yours, I'm not sure if you'll be able to do this, though. And you find an isolated stretch of road, you don't need to go that fast. But in vehicles with a handbrake, it's really easy. On vehicles with the foot parking brake, maybe not so much. But what you do is as you're riding along, you just hold the button down on the handbrake and pull up on it. And if you feel the vibration, then it's in the rear. If you don't feel the vibration, then it's likely in the front. And also, actually, anytime you have a vibration that causes the steering wheel to move, that usually indicates it's something going on at the front. These days, I haven't seen, in fact, I even posed this question quite some time ago on the forum, if anybody like machines rotors and drums anymore, because I don't often see it. It seems that everybody's just replacing them. And that seems to be the common practice. So you may find that, especially if your friction material has gotten to the point where it's gone, as they say, metal to metal, the friction material is gone and the metal backing is coming in contact with the rotor. If that's the case, then pretty much just replace the pads and the rotors and go from there. But I hope that helps you. And also, once again, when you're done, torque the wheels. That way it'll help prevent any pulsations that might be created by over torquing. A lot of times 80 foot-pounds is a good round number, but you can check the service manual for your vehicle to find out what the appropriate torque should be. Moving on. John Tarantino. Hey, cool. Hey, Eric, love the show and all you do. I have a 2005 Suzuki Verona SV6 2.5 liter automatic, 78,000 miles. I notice in the winter or colder temps, when I start the car, I hear a whining, almost buzzing type sound coming directly from the transmission case. It will go away once the car is warmed up enough. I'm 99% sure it's coming from the tranny, as I used a stethoscope to help pinpoint it. It shifts fairly smooth, but I notice a thud from second to third. It shifts from park to drive reversed quickly without delay. I've also had trans fluid changed at 50,000 scheduled maintenance. Does it sound like a flex plate or something worse with the tranny? Thanks again. Well, I don't believe it has anything to do with the flex plate. The flex plate is just a thing that the torque converter fastens to on the back of the engine. Problems there are like a knocking noise if the flex plate gets cracked, or the bolts are left loose during a transmission replacement. That can cause sort of a knocking type of noise as the engine is running, and it's pretty much constant. What you're experiencing are, in fact, you can almost consider that external from the transmission in a sense. Based on your 2-3 shift, it's not uncommon for automatic transmissions to suffer when they start to get older at the 2-3 shift, mainly because of the design of the automatic transmission. A lot of times when transmissions start to get old, start to wear out, the 2-3 shift is where it shows up. And that may be what you're dealing with. As far as the noise is concerned, pull the dipstick, take a look at the fluid. If it's got like a bunch of tiny bubbles in it, it may be getting aeration from somewhere. Possibly when they did the transmission service, if they didn't replace the O-ring on the filter going back up into the transmission, that could cause maybe a little bit of air or something to get drawn up into the transmission, which could cause the whining that you're having. That could possibly go away as it warms up, as you spoke about. It could also be the fluid itself. Not all fluids are created equal. There are so many different types of transmission fluid, automatic transmission fluid in particular, that are out right now. It's very important to use the correct fluid for your transmission. I'm a fan of synthetics when it comes to this. The transmission fluid is the lifeblood of that transmission, particularly with automatics. Everything works from that fluid. It does a lot of stuff. It cleans, it helps transfer pressure and force to different parts of it helps cool the transmission. It's got a lot of different jobs. That being said, it's very important that the fluid is as good as it possibly can be. So maybe less expensive fluids could cause issues, or it could just be that your transmission's getting older and it's starting to show its age. Does that mean that it's going to fail tomorrow? Absolutely not. And as far as that 2-3 shift, that could go on for a very long time before it becomes an issue, but it already sounds like you're up on your maintenance and everything else. So it's really hard to say that, yeah, you've got a definite problem, you should pursue it now. I'm not up on Suzuki's as far as knowing their specific issues or problems, but something you might consider doing is just doing a quick Google search on problems with transmissions with your vehicle to see if there's something associated with that noise that could be a common problem that you may be able to sort out that way. Outside of that, if it seems to be shifting fine, take it with a grain of salt and keep moving down the road, and possibly check those things that I mentioned early on in my comments. But good luck to you. Here we go. Mark Carr. My mother's 94 Jeep Grand Cherokee Laredo is making an awful sound in the video of the Jeep noises you did. Did you ever figure out what it was? Someone told me it was a timing chain, but not sure. Actually, I did figure out what it was, and in the description of both of those videos, I wrote down what happened to that engine, and pretty much it let go about maybe 2 hours after it left the shop. And that was in the bottom end, had nothing to do with the top end, anything I did. And I made that determination that the noise was not coming from the top of the engine, it was coming from the bottom of the engine. And I get this question a lot. So that should tell you something. If you've got a Jeep that's knocking, it could very well be that the bearings are done or something's worn out in the bottom end. But the one in the video that I did threw a rod right out the side of the block. That was it, game over. It's sad because it was only a year before that I put a transmission in that same Jeep. So if you've got one that's knocking like it was in the video, it could be the kiss of death. And I'd be looking for either another vehicle or some way of replacing the engine. I prefer replacement over rebuilding. It's just easier, in my opinion. I would go with a certified rebuild engine if I were to do it. They come with a warranty. Everything's plug and play. It's so much easier, so much less hassle to do that. And like I said, I did a video about that. But good luck with that issue, because yeah, that can be catastrophic. All right, Ray Semitak. I have a 2004 Jeep Liberty. The transmission is acting out. How can I replace the shift sensors without any experience? Well, first of all, Ray, when you go about a diagnosis, you don't necessarily go into it with assumptions. You weren't really clear in your description of whether or not you had gone through the process of figuring out why you feel that there's shift sensors, and I believe you're referring to shift solenoids that are a problem with that transmission. So usually you'll have a code, perhaps a check engine light code, or even separate codes for the transmit. There are usually separate codes for the transmission. Some vehicles have just the check engine light. Some of them have a separate light for transmission problems, or a lot of them just group everything under the check engine light. So you pull the code from the check engine and it comes up and it says that there's a transmission fault, possibly with a solenoid, whatever. And if that's the case, then you go through the process of looking into that solenoid to see if it's functioning properly, because it may not be the solenoid's fault. It could be the wiring going to that solenoid, or perhaps there's a fault within the computer that's not telling that solenoid to activate for whatever reason. There are a whole host of things before you get to the component that there's a code for. The only thing computers understand is voltage readings. So if they get strange voltage readings back, they set codes. They say, I'm getting a weird voltage reading from this. So that reading could be the result of too much resistance in the wiring, or an open circuit in the wiring, or it could be an open circuit in the component itself. You kind of want to at least go through the motions to see and verify that you have an issue like that, because with an automatic transmission, it could also be a mechanical failure that has nothing to do with the electronics. In fact, there are some codes out there that give you an indication that there could be a problem with the mechanical aspects of the transmission, such as things like speed, like main shaft speed sensor codes, or different codes that basically say the transmission is slipping. There could be a mechanical problem. So when you go about these problems, particularly with automatic transmission, don't necessarily dive in and go for a component. Try to get a little bit of backstory. Try to find out what is actually causing the problem. Not saying it couldn't be bad solenoids, because that's entirely possible. But before you go there, make sure it's not the wiring connector or something in the computer itself first. Good luck. Ooh, this is a challenging one. 75 HDFXE. I'll just go about it that way. Are there any cars that you refuse to work on? When I worked at a garage back in the 80s, some guy asked about getting work done on his Renault Alliance, and my boss said, no way. Personally, I don't run into this problem all that much. In fact, I hardly ever run into it. I don't work in a repair shop every single day. There's a lot of things I do as Eric the Car Guy. But as far as cars that I didn't like working on, I was never fond of working on German cars. Not that I haven't, not that I won't, but it was never really my thing. And considering that I was an Acura technician, working on Hondas and Acuras and Toyotas and Nissans and some of those other Asian makes are very familiar to me. And it's sort of like the medical profession, where you have doctors that are general practitioners that may do things, but then when they get to a point where it's like you got something like maybe a brain tumor or something like that. Hopefully that's not the case, but they send you to a specialist, and that specialist specializes in that area of the body and does what they do, and that's what they dedicate their time to, and they're very familiar with that. Kind of the same thing is true with technicians, in my opinion, that you have people who specialize maybe in certain makes, certain brands, or certain types of work. And I would say that, as far as what I'm good at, it's general mechanical work, and especially on Asian vehicles. That's where I excel. I'm pretty good in other areas. I can make videos, but outside of that, that's where I focus most of my expertise, let's say. That's what I've got the most experience with. And as far as auto repair goes, experience is huge. I talk a lot about automotive education and a lot of that kind of thing, and that is absolutely, in my opinion, a great thing to do. But once you get done with that education, your education really begins in a secondary manner after you get out into the workforce and you start getting your hands dirty and start dealing with some of these issues, because there's a lot of other stuff that they can't teach you in school, that you just have to learn through experience. And hence the reason why some people are more versed in certain types of vehicles than others. And obviously your old boss saying no way maybe had an experience with a Renault in the past, and it ate his lunch, and he's like, I'm done with that. So it does happen. As far as there's anything I refuse to work on, no, there's videos and everything, in my opinion. Stephen Curry, how much turbo and supercharger boost PSI is acceptable on a stock non-beefed up block without damaging pistons, rods, crank, etc.? Got to be specific on the block. You got to be specific on all those things. And even if you were specific on all those things, I really couldn't necessarily say. This is a question for a, like I say, like a particular forum that pertains to your vehicle or engine. And also there's the engine management system. You can't just bolt that stuff on. You kind of have to reprogram it to work with the increased air that's going into the engine. You have to add a proportional amount of fuel. If not, it'll run lean and it won't run correctly. Normally when you do any type of supercharging or turbocharging, you're adding a lot more air into the cylinder than would normally be there. So that being the case, you obviously are aware that adding all that extra air into the cylinder creates a lot more pressure, and as a result, things can heat up. And when things heat up too much in an engine, it could be catastrophic failure. Most times when you do put a supercharger or turbocharger on something, you want to use actually a low compression engine. Therefore, you can cram more into it. So stock engines are very receptive to this. I know that the B series Honda engine was very popular to turbocharge and well, yeah, turbocharging that, not so much superchargers, there weren't as many available, but as far as turbocharging that engine, a lot of people did it just right on the stock engine. I know that they were running 12 PSI safely. Maybe that gives you a round number or whatever. But safely, it's hard to say, because when you've got a car like that, you tend to drive it hard. When you drive things hard, things can break. And that's just how it goes. It's just, the saying is, how fast do you want to spend? And it's so true, so true. And I'm digging myself my own hole right now with my Fairmont project and that Mustang that I just got. So yes, let the spending begin. But anyway, good luck with whatever project you have there. And I would research specifically on the engine that you're trying to do something with. In fact, I might have over here, yes. There are books like this out there that talk about specific engines that that go through the specifics and the weak points of whatever it is that you're working on, and give you sort of the inside information. And if you're going to do something like that with performance, do your homework. The more homework you do, maybe you'll spend less down the road. Maybe. That's all I can say for you there. Good luck to you. All right. Here we go. Robert Ortega. Eric, what is your take on the police P71 Crown Victoria? Have you ever worked on these, and how would you rate this car as far as making mods to it? I haven't worked on a lot of them. The closest thing I've worked on recently was that Mercury Marquis that I was just doing blower motor stuff with. But that being said, you're talking about a fleet vehicle, and fleet vehicles are awesome because parts are relatively available. You can find them in just about any salvage yard. Plus, I know for a fact that Ford did many, many configurations of that platform. The Marauder, for instance. And there was a lot of mods that Ford had from the factory to add to that, not to mention the massive aftermarket. I don't think you're going to have trouble. I really don't. I think your biggest issue is going to be trying to decide what mods you want to do, because that car has been worked and worked again. And also, like, the whole front end assembly on that, I know people have used and like for older hot rods to make, you know, resto mod kind of things. They've taken the entire front end and everything out of those and fastened those to older chassis on older vehicles to make them handle and ride better. Also for parts availability, really great for that kind of thing. So that's a good platform to start with, in my opinion. And if it's a 5-liter, geez, I'm looking at 5-liter stuff now, because with my Fairmont project, I mean, that stuff goes way back. So you got tons and tons of options with that. I don't think you're gonna want for anything with that build. Good luck. Scott Duty. Hey, Eric, thank you for answering my clutch question 2 weeks ago. Unfortunately, I have to prep for a clutch replacement. I have been reviewing the Honda factory service manual clutch replacement procedure for my 2003 Honda Accord 2.4 liter, along with your V manual. The 2003 generation Accord requires the subframe to be removed in order to get to the transmission. I have an engine support tool similar to the one you used on your 99 Grand Am subframe video. Do you have any suggestions, tips, or tricks on attaching the engine support? The manual calls for a special hanger tool that bolts to the back of the engine block right below the valve cover. Could I just attach a fastener halfway and then attach my engine support to it? Doesn't matter where the engine is supported. Before unbolting the subframe, one of the service manual steps mentions making appropriate reference lines at both ends of the subframe that line up with the edge of the stiffeners. What is the purpose of this, and is it necessary? In your videos, I haven't seen you make any special markings when removing a subframe. After attaching the power steering rack to the steering linkage during reassembly, the service manual has a procedure to remove the steering wheel and go through the process to center the cable reel. I haven't seen you remove the steering wheel in your power steering rack videos. Is there a different way to do the process you go through when you drive the car to see how far off the steering is, then make adjustments by disconnecting and reconnecting the linkage? Thanks for all you do. That is quite a few questions, Scott. All right, first of all, as far as how to hook up the brace for the engine, you might want to watch the 2002 Focus clutch replacement, because I go through that same procedure. I have to drop the subframe onto it. I'm replacing a clutch. It's not a Honda, but the procedure is very similar to what you're dealing with. And actually, I have done clutches on these engines, but in like the RSX and TSX Acuras, which are really similar as far as the platform is concerned to the Accord that you're working on there. As far as, it just depends on your engine brace, as far as where you place it. As far as where to hook it up, I've never used the special tool that they talk about. I either hook onto, let's see, what did I do? Sometimes I put the chain around, well, you can't on that engine necessarily. On the V6 models, I put the chain around the intake manifold right behind the throttle body, and that seems to work pretty well. On that model, I'm trying to like piece it together. I think there might be a hook on the back of the engine block somewhere that you can bolt onto, but if that's not the case, I think you're on the right track by using a suitable fastener on the back of the engine block, so long as you're going into a secure location and that you're using at least a grade 8 bolt, because you are holding up the weight of the engine and the transmission. And I can't stress that enough, that you want to make sure that you secure that properly when you're going underneath there and working. You're going to be moving things around a lot when you remove the transmission, and when you go to replace it, safety is key here. So you want to make sure that it is secure. No matter what you do, that's like the most important thing, is you make sure everything is secure before you drop that subframe and you got the weight of the engine and transmission hanging above your head. So be very respectful of that. As far as when I do remove subframes, nah, I've never marked any of it. The reason why they want you to do that is because if you don't get it back into position, it could affect the alignment of the vehicle. Remember, attached to that subframe are the lower control arms, which are part of the suspension system, and there is no alignment adjustment outside of toe on that vehicle, which is the inward or outward tilt. The tie rod adjustments are the only thing you can do. You can't adjust camber or caster on that vehicle. It really just depends on the location of that cradle. So that's why they want you to be mindful of that. But I believe on the back corners there, what the factory uses are basically like little spud bars or dowels that come up through the back of that subframe. And there's like, you'll see a blind hole behind the bolts on the back side of it. And those holes not only go through the subframe, but they go up into the body of the vehicle. And that's how they locate everything. So if you need to move something around to get a bolt started or whatever, you can take like a lady slipper or something like that and stick it up in that hole and try to move it around so that you can get your bolt started. That's really going to be your primary concern there. If you're really concerned, or you have an alignment issue after the fact, you can take it to an alignment shop and they may be able to adjust the cradle to get things in the specifications. But I honestly don't think that's going to be an issue. I think the service manual is just pointing that out, being cautious to try to avoid any pitfalls there. As far as the steering linkage, I've never done any of this, cable reel stuff, but in all my power steering rack videos, I believe I've mentioned that you want to do what you can to keep the steering wheel in the same location while you've got the power steering rack or whatever out of the vehicle. That way, don't try to turn the wheel back and forth. In fact, I've even gone so far as to take, for whenever you do alignments, there's a tool that holds the steering wheel in place it's a spring-loaded thing that goes between the driver's seat and the bottom of the steering wheel. It just holds it. And I've used those in the past to prevent that movement, because there is a concern with those cable reels, as they're saying, that if you turn the wheel all the way around or you don't get it centered properly, when you go to turn the wheel full lock, if you didn't get it right, it'll tear that cable reel right up. So you want to make sure to keep the steering wheel straight. And it's normally not a problem. It's not like the steering wheel is going to move. You basically just pull that U-joint off the top of the steering rack, move it back, and just leave the steering wheel alone. Leave it where it is, and just don't go in there and don't touch it. It shouldn't move on its own. And then when you go to reattach it, just make sure that the steering wheel is as straight as it can be. And I usually leave my bolts loose, well, loose enough, and I'll take it just out in the parking lot and just drive it back and forth just to find out if the steering wheel is straight. And if it's not, I can just do a quick adjustment, just pull the joint up off of there and put it back down in the location that seems more appropriate. I'll test it out again and make sure that the steering wheel is straight as it can be, or pretty much where it was when I took the thing out. You're putting the same parts back in, so it's not like you're putting another rack in there. So it should come in and out, and you should be fine. But it's an involved job because of removing that subframe, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility. It's really just a matter of parts replacement, keeping your stuff organized with big jobs like that. So good luck. All right, I need to move on. Anelia Fedek, hey Eric, I was replacing the rear brake pads on my 2001 Passat. When I removed the brake bleeder bolt and tried to replace it back, I noticed the thread inside the bolt hole of the caliper was stripped. I've been looking online for repair options and was wondering what you think about this. I don't want to buy a new caliper if I do not need to. Let me know if you have a better idea. Thanks. Bleeder bolt. I'm confused on that because normally you have bleeder valves. In other words, it's like a taper threaded orifice, if you will, that when you run it down, it basically seals it up. And when you open it up, it allows the fluid to pass through it. If there's a bolt in place, maybe that's the problem. Maybe somebody put a bolt in place of a bleeder because they had an issue with the bleeder. And if that's the case, really, I think your only option is to try and tap out the hole and be very careful not to get like metal shavings down inside the caliper if you can avoid that at all. Just rethread the hole and then put another bolt in its place. And in the future, I would bleed at the brake line, where the brake line attaches to the caliper, instead of even messing with that. If it's been stripped once, you don't want it to strip again, or else you will be buying a caliper. So hopefully you'll be able to rethread that hole and put some other fastener in its place that will seal. And that could be a tall order. But you definitely want to make sure it's sealed up. These are your brakes you're talking about. You don't want any leaks in your braking system. Jeffrey So. Hey Eric, I'm a huge fan of your channel. I have a 2001 Chrysler Voyager with a 3.3 liter V6 engine with 120,000 miles. A little history of the car is the car was bought brand new. The transmission was replaced with a rebuilt one in 2013. However, the issue right now is the engine cylinder number 1 has a constant misfire. Following the spark plug, it burns about 1 quart of oil every 500 miles. It is excessive. How would I know if it's a head problem or a low-end problem? I'm considering donating the car, but I'm having second thoughts because this car is in good condition other than the engine problem, and the training has just been replaced 2 years ago. What are your thoughts on this car? This is the perfect fixing it forward candidate if you are open to this. As far as fixing it forward, in fact, the next thing I'm looking for is I'm looking to help some veterans. So I'm headed in that direction. So if you're a veteran, possibly, yes. To be honest with you, it's not likely to be the cylinder head. It's more likely to be the bottom end. But the way you make that determination is with something called a leak down test. And basically what you're doing is you're running compressed air into the affected cylinder, and that compressed air is going to leak out somewhere. If you remove the oil cap and you hear the air leaking out, then it's leaking past the rings. If you listen in the intake and you hear it leaking out there, then it's an intake valve problem. If you listen to the exhaust pipe and you hear the air leaking out there, then it's an exhaust valve problem. If you take the radiator cap off and you see bubbles coming up through the coolant, it's a leak into the combustion chamber. Most likely cause would be head gasket, but there's always a possibility that the cylinder head or cylinder block is cracked, causing that same issue. You don't know until you get it apart. So that's how you make that determination. And I feel your pain. And I've seen this before where, you make a good investment into a vehicle, you think you're good, and then something else catastrophic comes along. It's quite possible that's the case here. If you do run into that, I would recommend a long block replacement if it comes down to it and you're willing to move on with the vehicle. But honestly, I've looked into the pricing of these, including the 98 Chrysler that I'm working on, the Chrysler that I'm working on now, and they aren't worth that much. So you really have to say to yourself, am I ready for a car payment or do I want to keep going with what I have? So that's a tough call, if I'm honest. And as I said, that leak down test will tell you if it's going, the leak is in the top or the bottom of the engine. I'll post a link down in the description of the video that I did on that test to give you a little more familiarity with what I'm talking about. Tom Donovan, hey Eric, I picked up an automatic 2002 Pontiac Sunfire with 170,000 miles earlier this week, and I have an issue with the daytime running lights or high beams. Background of the issue: when I start the car and put it into gear, the DRL relay flickers 5 to 7 times and stops. During this time, the lights flicked out but refused to stay on. After that, the service wrench light comes on. After that, I turn on the lights, low beams work, and switching from low to high beams all shuts off all lights. Where should I start? Thanks in advance. It just so happens I had somebody on the forum just last week with a similar problem on a similar type of vehicle. It was a GM vehicle. And what they found was an issue with the DRL module, box, whatever. They found that it was sort of burned up. So maybe you might want to just go down there and find that DRL box up underneath the dash, give it a sniff. If it smells like burned electrical stuff, that could be the issue. Also, I know that some GM vehicles have had issues with headlight switches. So if there's a problem with a headlight switch, a lot of those headlight circuits run through that switch. I think DRLs will run on a separate circuit entirely. But somewhere in there, they're going to tie together. They're both turning on the same lights. Well, maybe not necessarily. It just depends. But I would be checking that DRL box up underneath the dash to start with. Maybe just tap on it a little bit, see if things start to work, if that clicking starts to happen. If that does happen, I'd replace that DRL box and see if that cures the problem. Outside of that, I might be looking to the headlight switch. But overall, the best thing to do is get yourself a wiring diagram, find out how it's all wired up, and start tracing stuff down. And unfortunately, that's what you're faced with outside of that. But hopefully, maybe you'll have some luck with that DRL box and be done with it. Yeah, we're going to keep going for a bit. Naoki Saito. Hey Eric, loving your show, still years on. I have a Ford Mondeo MK3 2001, which occasionally takes excessive time to start regardless of temperature. It has recently had a full service done on it, and fuel filter is less than a week old. I've been told it's got a dirty fuel system, which I'm likely to believe, as it is the original FOMOCO filter. It had the original FOMOCO filter fitted. That, and it once had a hesitation where on acceleration lagged and felt like not all cylinders were firing properly, even though they were firing. After a brief hesitation, it would pick up and go like normal, albeit sometimes it would shudder when driving. Okay, you have a performance issue. Now, this could be a fuel delivery issue, as you suspect. The best way to confirm that is with a fuel pressure test and compare it to specifications. I have a video on checking fuel pressure. That's step one. If you suspect a fuel delivery problem, which could very well be, check the fuel pressure. And then if you find a problem with the fuel pressure and you start going back to the gas tank and you start dropping the fuel pump out of there, have a look down inside the tank, look for debris. If you see a lot of debris, just take a flashlight, put it down in there. If you see a lot of debris in the bottom of the tank, then there could be something to this debris clogging up the pickup and causing issues with the fuel pressure. If there is no debris there, then it could very well be that your fuel pump is going out. My friend from Real Fixes Real Fast, Dwayne, did a really great video once on checking a fuel pump just by checking the amperage at the fuel pump fuse with a lab scope. It was really great. You could actually see the phases that the fuel pump was going through, and one of those phases was missing. So like I said, I have one of them that was missing. So it wouldn't allow the fuel pump to create a full volume of fuel as a result. And it was really kind of trick how he did it just by plugging into the fuse on the fuse box. I don't know if I'll be able to dig that video up or not, but if I am, I'll post a link to it in the description. If not, check out Real Fixes Real Fast. There are other issues there could be. I'm also going to post a link in the description to an entire article I wrote about performance issues that covers many of the things that cause performance issues, like you're talking about with your hesitation and hard starting and that type of thing. But with you, given your description, the first thing I would do is probably check the fuel pressure just to see if that is indeed an issue. But it also could be vacuum leaks. Once again, that's covered in that article that I'm going to link for you down in the description. Joe Malone, have you ever put together a ride for a disabled vet and donated it to one? No, I haven't, but I would love to do something like that. That's kind of where Fixing It Forward is going if I have anything to do with it. Okay, Jeff N, please answer. Hey, Eric, I've been having an issue with my 09 Grand Cherokee for the past 8 months. What happens is when idling at its normal 550 to 600 RPM range, it will sometimes drop down from that to the point of 450, but bring itself right back up almost as if it's about to stall, but seems to always catch itself. The idle surge happens only when the road is wet. If the road is dry, it never happens. When the road is wet, for the surge to start, it takes about 45 minutes of driving on the wet road for it to occur. Then the next day, when the road is dry, the surge will continue for 45 minutes and will stop once the road is dry. I have replaced a lot of things, including crankshaft or camshaft, crankshaft position sensor, cleaned the throttle body, coolant temperature sensor, spark plug, check transmission fluid level, map sensor, PCV valve, EGR valve, coil packs, spark plug wires, IAT sensor, and ECU reflash twice, once with the old throttle body and once with the new. I even installed a new throttle body and same thing happens. Mechanic has no idea what the problem is and neither does the dealer. So it looks like I am at a loss. There are no codes. I believe this to be an electrical issue. By the way, I can idle in the rain without moving and it will never surge, but as soon as I start driving around on the wet road, the idle surge will start. Granted, it has been 45 minutes or longer. Tried posting this to Jeep forums and no one knows either. Thank you for your help. Okay, based on your description, you've got to duplicate the conditions. And what I would suggest to duplicate those conditions, okay, you're driving along. Water is splashing up under your vehicle. Try to maybe get under there with a squirt bottle and squirt everything electrical and see if it starts to act up. And just simulate those conditions. Just try soaking down wiring harnesses, or look, like if you've got missing inner fender flares, or maybe a missing mud flat, or some way for fluid to get into an electronic component somewhere. That's what you're looking for. If you've had a windshield replaced, you might want to check around the fuse box, around those areas, because I have seen that in the past where sometimes water will leak in around the windshield, go down the A-pillar, and get down into electrical components up underneath the dash. That can cause issues as well. So if you strike out spraying around in the engine compartment, particularly the lower part of the engine compartment, just soak that stuff down and see if it starts to act up. If it does in a particular area, you might have narrowed it down. It sounds like a lot of people have tried to find this issue, but given that it's intermittent nature and very specific nature, it's going to be tough to track down. So the thing to do here is to do whatever you can to try to duplicate that condition so that you can possibly get it to act up. That's what you're going for here. So like I say, squirt bottle, sitting there, squirting things, everything electrical, harnesses, all that, maybe it'll start to act up. If it does, bam, you're golden. You found it. But intermittent electrical problems are the worst. And that's probably why people have been left scratching their heads and kicked you back out the door, because they don't necessarily have the time to invest into it, because maybe you say, I've only got so much money to spend, and they're like, well, you got to spend a lot of money on something like this because we got to drive around in the rain for 45 minutes. Yeah, it's a catch-22 situation, I'm sure, but maybe if you follow that, you'll be able to pinpoint and locate the problem. But I do wish you luck in that, Jeff. All right, let's do one more at least. Hey, Eric, I have a Honda Civic 1993 D15B2 engine dual point PGMFI head. When I fill up the gas tank, the car is hard to start and stalling. If I press the gas pedal a few times, the problem goes away and only comes back at the next fill up. Do you know what could be the problem? If yes, what is faulty then? What is the faulty item? I suspect the problem with the charcoal canister. I hope you've come across this problem before and you can help me. Kind regards, Laz from UK. Okay, Laz. Yes, it could possibly be a problem with the evaporative emission system, could be a problem with the charcoal canister. Probably not. I'm thinking maybe purge control or some line is blocked somewhere. And the 93 might not be setting the codes that it could set on a newer vehicle to tell you, to help you pinpoint a problem with the evaporative emission system. About the only thing I could do is, this is what I would suggest. I would suggest seeing if you can seek out a factory service manual that goes over the testing of the evaporative emission system on that vehicle. And that could possibly help you, because there could be a valve that's stuck open as you fill it up. There could be a valve that's stuck open, allowing all those gas fumes to go into the engine while you're filling it up. And if that's the case, when you go to start it, it's flooded. In essence, that's what it is. It's flooded. So you pushing on the gas pedal allows more air to come in and helps correct that problem. So that's where I'd be going with that. I would be looking at the evaporative emission system when you fill up. I'm trying, maybe vent. It's hard to say, but I think you're on the right track with the charcoal canister and things related to it. So I hope you're able to glean some information from that. But yeah, I've also done a video on finding service manuals online, which might be your best option for that instead of actually going out and finding one. But I found them on eBay and they've been reasonably priced. That's a 93. So there's a paper manual out there somewhere. But you may also be able to find a PDF that could help you out with that as well. All right, last one. Abdullah Gaim. I'm sorry. Hey Eric, 2007 Acura TL with 153,000 miles. Usually when I go over 60 miles an hour and sometimes even at lower speeds, I get some vibration under the gas pedal. The gas pedal is drive-by-wire. I just installed 2 new tires on the front, had new wheels installed, turned my front rotors, replaced the front upper control arms, and replaced the lower ball joints, and still no luck. Do you know what would cause a vibration under the gas pedal? I don't feel it in the steering wheel. Thanks. I like watching your shows. Keep up the good work. Okay. Vibration gas pedal may have nothing to do with any of that stuff. In fact, it's a common misconception that suspension components can lead to vibrations. Not necessarily, no. In fact, it's hardly ever. It's things that rotate that cause vibrations many times. And in your case, you might be looking at the way the engine is running, maybe possibly looking for restricted exhaust, something of that nature. As far as the new tires and things like that, those cars are very, very picky about the tires that you put on them. If you put anything but Michelins on them, it could be a problem. And even the Michelins, when they're cold, have a vibration until they heat up. You're kind of stuck on that weird low profile kind of stuff that car takes. But that said, the vibration in the gas pedal, that's strange. Like if it were a problem with the wheels, I would think you'd feel it in the steering wheel. But because you're feeling it in the gas pedal, I would think that it's something as far as where the engine runs, the transmission, or some other something that's there that's causing that vibration is where I'd be looking. But I don't think it's in the driveline based on what you're describing there. I think it might be something with the engine. Okay, one more. Jeff Mezzaroli, hey Eric, please settle a debate between myself and my fiance. Is there any truth to the belief that the weight of your keychain can damage the ignition switch in your car? Thanks. Ooh, good question. Now, I'm going to say just straight out, yes, it can. And the weight of it, I'm basing this on the fact that I have had vehicles come in where the ignition, the keys have, you look at their keychain and it's like a foot long. It's got all this stuff on it. There's a whole bunch of weight, and they've got an intermittent problem with an ignition switch. Now, Hondas are mostly what I've worked on, and I've seen plenty of ignition switch problems just on their own that have nothing to do with any of that. But there's something else to consider here. Saabs, they put the ignition down in the console. When you start the car, you stick the key down in the console and you turn it, you start that way. They don't put it up on the steering wheel. Why? Well, because in the event of a collision, you are moving forward, the car stops suddenly. Your knees come into contact with the dashboard or the lower part of the dashboard often. If you have a lot of stuff on your keys, basically you've got yourself a nice little shredder that your knee is going into. So beyond, whether or not it's going to hurt your ignition switch, in the event of a collision, if there's a lot of things hanging down on your keychain and your knee goes into that, well, that can get ugly. So, and like I said, Saab solved the problem by putting the ignition switch down inside the console. However, if you spill a drink on that ignition switch, which I've seen more than once, they put like a cup holder there next to it in one of those models, that can pretty much fry your ignition system. So there is that side of things. All right, I'm going to call it here. Because we've gone over it just a little bit. but I've tried to answer as many as I can, sometimes a bit long-winded. Sorry about that. Once again, if you're watching this on YouTube, I cannot see those questions that are posted there. I will be not answering questions posted to the YouTube video. Apologies for that. Also, questions posted to this Google Plus event after it has concluded, which is concluding now, those questions will not be answered. Apologies for that. The next show will be on May 27th, so stop back then. You can start posting your questions usually a few days in advance, usually the Friday beforehand. I post the event. You can start posting them there. Obviously, if you get in early, you're most likely to get your question answered. But there is always EricTheCarGuy.com available to 365, 24/7, available to get answers over there. There will also be additional information in the description of this video that could also help you, that leads to different things on my website, all that kind of stuff. If you wish to connect with me socially, Google+, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I close each of my videos, including these live shows. Thank you for watching, by the way, with be safe, have fun, stay dirty. I will see you next time. And give me a minute to get that stuff down in the description. I should have it up for you in about a half hour or so. See you next time.